Hello. Yes. Turn the volume up. Yes. I know it's been a while. I know I've been negligent. Took a little break. I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks. We got a phenomenal guest. We're going to talk a little baseball. If you're a baseball fan, stay right there. Tell me who your favorite team is right now, just so I kind of have an understanding what I'm dealing with. Is it all Yankee fans, Red Sox fans, or if you're a baseball fan anywhere around the country, tell me right now. So we're going to be giving away a Dwight Gooden ball, and we're going to give away an Andujar ball, which I know he's a little hurt, but maybe he's coming back. Don't panic. Anyway, I'm with Tyler Kepner, wrote the book K, interviewed several hundred people for this book. We're going to talk about baseball, how the whole art of pitching comes about. Got a Vanderbilt grad. If you're from Vandy, say hello. Right. Love to hear from you. Tyler, welcome, and nice to see you. We love baseball here. We're baseball fanatics.
Oh, yeah.
Are you a baseball fanatic?
Absolutely. My whole life, that's all I ever wanted to do was be in baseball. Or be around baseball.
Why'd you write this book, though? You could have done this book around hitting. You could have done it around all kinds of different things. Why pitching? Why K?
Well, I was really lucky to be 7 years old, living outside Philadelphia, when Steve Carlton won his last Cy Young Award. And in 1982, he led the majors in wins and innings and strikeouts and all those old-time numbers we used to love so much. And I was just captivated. I was like, this guy is. He used to warm up on a mound down by the first base side of the vet. And on the days he was pitching that I had, was at the ballpark, I'd scramble down to the front row at the vet and look up at him warming up, and it was like a god. I mean, he's a big enough guy anyway.
Big guy.
But man,
lefty.
To be 7 years old and to look at him and to have him be the best pitcher in baseball, and then the next year go to the World Series. I missed 1980. I was a little too young. But 82, 83, that hooked me on baseball and particularly on pitching. I tried to pitch. I mean, I pitched in high school, media games. It's nothing like what those guys do, though, and that's what I wanted to get at. It's how they do what they do.
So tell me, like, the most important aspect that somebody who bought this book, what are they going to get out of it?
I think they're going to come away with a better understanding of what goes into a game. The decisions that pitchers have to make, the hundreds of decisions every game, that go into that pitcher-batter encounter. But more than that, I think it's the sort of the legacy of passing a pitch down through the generations. One of my favorite stories in there is about how Johnny Padres, won the 1955 World Series with a shutout. And he was a change-up master, right, for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He became a pitching coach. He taught it to many people, including Frank Viola, who went on to win the first World Series for the Minnesota Twins, throwing a change-up. And Guy Conti, who was a coach with the Dodgers.
Johnny Padres under a very undervalued. He was a great pitcher.
He was a great pitcher,
and really didn't really get the props he probably deserved.
And a tremendous coach. I mean, that's what I was talking about. Like he would teach it to so many people.
I used to kind of give Johnny Padres quick appearances so he had money to go to the track. He
right.
Loved the ponies.
That was what Guy Conti was a Dodger coach who taught it to Pedro through Johnny, and he said they went over to '88. Peter O'Malley took everybody over to Italy in the organization after winning the championship, and Johnny was on the bus and he was getting a little restless. He's like, "Hey, Guy, let's go to the track. Let's go." He's like, "Johnny, we're on Pompeii. We can't go to the track." But he was just a baseball guy. He was just a baseball guy.
So who's this book for? Is this for a baseball enthusiast that just wants to learn that much more about the game? A baseball fan, a potential kid that wants to be a pitcher?
I think all those. I think it would appeal to even casual fans because I'm not a coach. I'm not an instructor. I'm not a scientist who's going to throw a ton of numbers at you, right? I'm a storyteller, and my job is really to tell the New York Times is to tell stories and explain what it all means, analyze these things. And so I felt like I could bring those strengths to this because I would talk to pitchers about how they learned their best pitch and how they applied it, right? And there's a story behind all that stuff. I try to get in those moments that we remember. Ralph Terry on the mound in Game 7 of the '60 World Series facing Bill Mazeroski. What did you throw and why? And then 2 years later against Willie McCovey when another home run would lose another Game 7 and he gets him out on a line drive. Going inside his mind on those kind of situations.
Well, first of all, are we able to give away this book?
Sure.
So tell us who your favorite pitcher is, or if there's a moment where you saw a pitcher do something amazing. What are we going to win, Drew?
Dwight Gooden signed ball.
A Dwight Gooden ball. And also, we'll pick the winner out. He'll sign this book. You win this book. Just respond. And by the way, we're giving away an Andujar ball if you tell us what your favorite team is and where you're from. Who was the most interesting? Because I know pitchers are, they're a lot intense. They're thinkers. Although Mariano, when I talked with him, was not much. He kind of kept it really simple. What'd you find? What was the most interesting pitcher you talked to that you really didn't see coming? The way they looked at a game, the way they looked at pitching.
The most surprising, because
Yeah.
the most interesting, I think, is the guy I learned the most from was Mike Mussina. I mean,
Really?
covering the Yankees for 8 years, including the last 7 years of Mike's career.
Why
I learned-
was Mike so interesting?
Because he could verbalize what goes out on the mound just really, really well. I mean, he's a Stanford guy. He's really, really smart. And if you got to know him, sometimes it might take a little while, but if you got a chance to really know him, sit down with him, he was brilliant. I think he didn't suffer fools or whatever, but like if he sort of respected you and that you could maybe hang with him a little bit in what he was saying. We had lunch up there in Montoursville, PA, where he lives, and we talked for 2 hours just about all the pitches, because Mike had so many different ways to get guys out, right? So he could talk about not just his curve, but all the different pitches that he could use, and just the art of pitching in general. So it wasn't a surprise, but I learned more from him than anybody.
And who was the most surprising?
Well, the most surprising, I think, just because I had no prior dealings with him at all, was the guy who got the very last out of the seventh game of the World Series between the Cubs and the Indians, Mike Montgomery. He is still kind of a middle reliever, spot starter guy, unsung hero kind of guy. And after they had used Hendricks and Lesser and Chapman, they even went to Carl Edwards. And when the time came to get that last out, Joe Madden, after the game, he just sort of offhandedly said, "I wanted the curveball in that moment." So I thought, well, let's dig into that curveball. Let's find out the story behind the pitch that finally won the World Series for the Cubs. But I didn't know if Mike Montgomery was going to be a good talker or interested or not. And we talked for hours over the phone that offseason. And wherever I see him, he's asked about the book and he's excited to, I think, be in it. But we just went real deep. But he said he's the first curveball he threw that year preparing for the season. He threw to his mom playing catch. And she was like, "That's all you got?" And she used to play softball. She was an athlete.
Yeah.
But still, he was like, "Man, this isn't even impressing my mom here. I better work on this pitch."
Did you get to guys like Pedro or Nolan Ryan or Tom Seaver or names like the Roger Clemens?
Yeah, I got 3 of those 4. I was too late to get Seaver,
Okay.
but I talked to Pedro and Roger and who was the other one you just said there? Randy Johnson. I talked to Greg Maddox. 22 Hall of Fame pitchers.
You got to Roger. What was Roger's
Roger.
thinking?
Roger was good.
Was a thinker?
Roger loved to have that pitcher catcher interaction where someone like Andy Pettit sort of like, he's going to do what he let the catcher drive that bus. But Roger loved the pitcher catcher. We're a team on this. He talked about the splitter and about how the myth in his mind that it's a dangerous pitch. He talked about just the difference in throwing it with your wrist and everything. I got him at the Astros spring training.
How about Pedro? What was he about? What was Pedro about?
Pedro was interesting about the changeup and about learning location to command. I guess he was.
did anybody have more command and hit more people than Pedro? No question, he hit people on purpose.
Yeah,
There's no question he hit people on purpose.
Oh, sure.
There's
yeah.
no doubt.
Yeah, remember that game, that afternoon game at Yankee Stadium,
Hit
where
the Soriano and
he
Jeter.
sent them both to the hospital.
Jeter and Soriano,
Yeah, before
right.
the second inning was over.
But the rumor in the clubhouse was that he couldn't decide which one to hit, so he hit them both.
Was he in a-
Yeah, because then the clubhouse like, which one should we hit? And he said, just hit them both.
Right.
So he starts the game off with first and second.
Yeah.
The guy had balls though.
Oh yeah. No,
I mean,
he
didn't bother him.
He
to
was a
put it-
little dude and didn't back down from anybody.
anyone.
But that changeup was just a magical pitch for him.
You talk about in this book like who developed the strike, who developed the curveball, like how these pitches got passed down. Anything surprising there? How do these pitches even start? They go all the way back to the beginning, or
Yeah, there's sort of a lot of obscure guys who kind of he would throw the pitch first, and then it didn't really go anywhere, and it needed some a bigger name to kind of pass it down. I mean, the curveball has an origin story that may be mythical, but it's on the plaque in Cooperstown that Candy Cummings first started throwing curveballs by flinging clamshells on the beach in Brooklyn and seeing how they would move this way or that way and think, I can play a good trick on the batsman in my game, And so he would go, and he was a little guy, but he was credited with throwing the first curveball. But I tell you what, in those files of Cooperstown, when you go and research these pitches, there are so many people who make claims of throwing the first curveball. Those two things, who threw the first curveball and do balls actually curve, were like giant pieces of conversation for decades. People didn't believe the balls actually
who
curve.
gets credit for the first cutter though?
The first cutter, well, I mean, Mariano is held up so high for the cutter, deservedly so. But there were guys before
Throwing the cutter.
throwing the
What's
cutter,
his name
yeah.
on the Cubs? I thought was throwing a cutter.
Right now on the Cubs or
No,
previously?
back in the day, he had a nasty cutter. And then you got traded to Atlanta. Was that?
Oh, you talking about Bruce Sutter with the splitter?
Well, Bruce Sutter had
had
the
the splitter
splitter,
with
but
the-
who had the cutter, Ben? Do you remember?
I mean, one of the guys I talked to about it was Jim Abbott. Remember a Yankee? Jim Abbott threw a cutter, and he didn't really know.
Oh wow!
What
so
his
it's all the way
yeah,
back
late
then.
'80s and
Yeah.
early '90s. Jerry Royce, remember he had a great game against the Yankees in the '81 World Series. He was throwing cutters, in on the hands. He really had a late career renaissance, Jerry Royce, in the early '80s by throwing that pitch and getting in on righties when they weren't expecting it. But yeah,
Is there any truth to like the Tommy John surgery ends up enabling you to be even a better pitcher?
those
Does that come up?
that they warn against that. Like don't have preemptive surgery thinking it'll make you better. If you're wearing down over the time, and then then you can get it stitched up, and then maybe you'll be better.
Right.
But only because you were hurt.
Because you see so many great pitchers who had the Tommy
Yeah.
John, but I
Yeah.
don't think it's
You
something
were hurt
want.
before.
Now you're seeing like regular players getting Tommy John, which
Right,
is
Didi,
unbelievable.
a couple years ago, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
First,
And
first
even-
Hall of
and
Famer
even
with Tommy
reg-
John
and-
is actually not a pitcher.
Who was that?
Paul Molitor had it
Really?
in the '80s. Yeah.
Wow. and what's his
1984.
name? Gleiber had. I think Gleiber had.
Yeah,
Right?
he had an awkward slide, I think,
Yeah,
in
it's
the
crazy.
minors. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, how'd you get it? First of all, how'd you make the transition into covering baseball?
You know what? I've been covering baseball since I've been covering baseball 30 years. I'm 44 years old. I've been covering 30 years, and I'll tell you how.
Since you're 14.
Yeah, when I was 14
Wow.
in outside Philadelphia, I started a baseball magazine. I just couldn't wait to get started in this business. I was really inspired by the sports writers I read, particularly Jason Stark in the Philadelphia Inquirer growing up. He'll be in Cooperstown this year getting the Writers Award.
Nice.
Just a wonderful guy, mentor to me, and a good friend my whole for 30 years now. But I published a little baseball magazine, and we would, we had subscribers in school, and then eventually, I was very naively, I would write to my favorite sports writers and sportscasters and say, what am I doing well? What am I not doing well? How can I get better?
And they would get back to you.
And they would get back to me, and George Vesey, God bless him, I ended up working with him for many years at the Times.
Great writer.
Great writer, great guy, and he wrote me some very nice notes, but also he showed his sports editor and said, this might be a cute little article. So someone at the New York Times wrote an article about me in 1989. I was 14 years old, and they published my address. So we started getting subscriptions from all over the country. And my mom was the business manager, and the Phillies, my dad had been in the Army Reserves with Dave Montgomery. It was one of their top executives in the ownership group now, and Dave put in a good word for me with the PR people, and I did my first interview the day after I turned 15.
Wow.
Pat
So
Combs, the old pitcher.
So you're a fan of, if you're out there, we have a lot of young kids that watch this program, or people, you like playing in traffic when you're young. Try something. Just if you're loving what you're doing, try it.
Yeah, I mean, just go out and do it. That's what people would say. I said, how do you get better as a writer? And they say, just write, man. Just write. Write as much as you can. And it doesn't even matter if anyone's reading it. Just you'll get yourself better by doing it.
Now, did you go to Vanderbilt because that great baseball school?
Yeah.
Sonny Gray, but you got a bunch of former pitchers that have gone there.
Yeah, when I was there in the '90s, we only had one major leaguer, Josh Paul.
That's it?
Yep, that was it. We all had some
really?
first round picks, and it was a good program, but
Yeah.
they've taken it to such a high level there. But yeah, I mean, I went to Vanderbilt. I was. It's cool. They have a scholarship at Vanderbilt just for sports writers. They don't have a journalism program, but they have a scholarship for an
Now, do you
aspiring
contribute
sports
to
writer.
that, or
What's
are
that?
you involved in that, or?
I got it. So I've been back here and there, and
Wow.
it's funded through or at least when I was there, through the Thoroughbred Racing Association of America, named after Grantland Rice and Fred Russell, two great sports writers there. But yeah, I just basically my college life was just down at the paper. I covered every sport, SEC football, SEC basketball, and then became editor of the paper, and really learned by doing.
What's your take on the sport now with some of the rule changes? Any opinion on any of that as far as how that affects the game? Are you a fan of making these altercations with, time and how much time the pitcher has, and not maybe having a pitcher have to throw to three batters, things like that?
Yeah, I don't like that one. I don't like any kind of artificial manipulations of what a manager can do. I think baseball, if you take the scope of history, baseball has always sort of adjusted back and forth. Now, there are things, like it's the first time ever last year, more strikeouts than hits. Longest games, game times are getting longer. I understand that. But I also remember, I'm sure you do, anyone with some institutional knowledge, people have been predicting baseball's demise forever because it's slower than other sports. It requires a different sensibility. It's not fast. It's not with the young generation. I've been hearing that since I was part of the young generation. And guess what? I mean, it's still an industry that can sustain 30 teams, 162 games, a huge minor league system, a lot of programming, and it still is profitable for a lot of people. It's still right. So it's, people say football is a more popular sport. It's like, well, okay, it's apples and oranges because you've got 16 football games versus, again, so many baseball
162.
games. Right, plus the minor leagues and all that stuff. So it's like fans love going to the ballpark. They love watching on TV. I think the product could be better or different, but I don't want to artificially change it.
You like the shift?
Don't love it, but wouldn't want to change it.
But that's not how the game was played all these years. Is it kind of like a zone defense? Like, do you or should the game adjust and learn to hit?
I think the game should adjust. I think we should just see how these guys adjust to all this stuff. Because hitters have adjusted over time. Hitters are incredible athletes. These guys are all incredible athletes. You tell them, you shift the game one way, and eventually they will be skilled enough to shift it back. We see it over and over again.
I'm hoping so. What do you think about the pitch counts? Everybody's so focused on these pitch counts and guys not being able to finish games as opposed to a lot of guys you interviewed. Think that is overplayed? What do some of the pitchers say?
As I talked about, my favorite player of all time, Steve Carlton. He's the last guy to throw 300 innings. When I covered the Yankees for those 8 years, my favorite opposing player to watch was Roy Halladay because he would go late, and I got to talk to him, which was a huge thrill.
Wow.
He would go deep in games. He'd throw complete games. He'd make those Yankees hitters who were so good look feeble up there, taking these swings that they didn't have against any other hitter. So I love those pitchers who can go deep in games. The Max Scherzer who wants to go 9 innings all the time. But I do feel like there's such an inventory now of really good arms that teams, it's understandable why they'd want to hand the ball to someone else. You got good guys coming out of the bullpen. Look at the Yankees. Tampa Bay just has all these good young pitchers.
Oh, yeah.
Why would they want guys to go?
I think it'll be the year of the pitcher, but it seemed like also even last year, it just seemed like pitching was more dominant than hitting, unless you were hitting home runs.
Right. Yeah, more strikeouts than and I appreciate how good these pitchers are. Center field camera is a beautiful thing to get to see the action on the pitches. It does take when it's a big strikeout and home run game. It does take away some of the possibilities of this thinking man's game, right? Like, is he going to run here? Is he going to bunt? There's not as much maybe strategy so that's missing. But the athleticism of these guys and what these pitchers can do and what these hitters can do, it's crazy.
It is crazy. In this book, back to the cave for a minute. What's the biggest takeaway that someone's going to take away from this book? Is there a highlight in this book that somebody doesn't want to miss?
Well, I tell you, in general, when I coached Little League for 7 years, my kid was coming through, and
did you win?
We came so close. We made the playoffs every year, but we never got that final championship. It'll always haunt me.
I'm sure. I wish I would have known you. I would have been able to help you. I would have coached you.
It will haunt me. But I would tell the kids, I want you to finish up this season having fun and with a greater appreciation and love of baseball.
Screw the having fun. I always took a vote with my kids, and I said, look, do you want to have fun or do you want to win? They always voted to want to win. I said, let's get on with it.
But the
and as we won, we had fun.
That was, you'd have fun by winning, and you'd have fun by loving the game. And,
that's true, though.
And we did make the playoffs every year. But the point is, like, I sort of want the same for this book. I want people to appreciate and understand baseball a little bit, have fun reading it, and just love the game a little more. Look, I cover the industry, so I got to cover warts and all. But I'm genuine about it. I'm passionate about this game. I love it. That's why I'm doing this. Why I did the book. Why I do what I do professionally. And I feel like people will understand the human beings who pitch and just that very human kind of pursuit of excellence. Again, someone like a Trevor Hoffman, right? Who lost his best fastball when he was playing beach volleyball one day during the strike. And then we went out and played in the surf and fell awkwardly and realized he was never going to have that lightning in his shoulder anymore. So he's like, well, how do I survive with not throwing nearly as hard as I ever will again? And he turned to a teammate named Donnie Elliott, who showed him a weird new way to throw a changeup. And Donnie Elliott didn't go to the Hall of Fame. He barely pitched in the big leagues. Trevor Hoffman took it to Cooperstown. So that idea that of pitchers always wanting to do something a little better. How can you help me, and then how can I help the next guy? I think that's a universal sort of theme.
I do too. It's funny, because a lot of players complain that Mariano used to help a lot of other pitchers on other teams.
That's what Roy Halladay talked about.
Yeah, and
book.
Roy Halladay being one of them. Give me your Mount Everest of pitchers. Mount Rushmore. I said Everest. I meant Mount Rushmore. Give me your Mount. By the way, before you give me that answer, give me your Mount Rushmore of pitchers. If you were to pick your favorite 4 pitchers, give them to me right now.
Now, favorite's different than best. Are you asking me favorites?
Give me your the best. Give me the best 4 pitchers that you, in your opinion, the 4 that you would get a take since.
Wow. And now if it's favorites, it's different, because I'm going Tug McGraw, Steve Carlton, maybe Roy Halladay,
But maybe we have to take away the relief pitchers.
Different.
Maybe it's just starters.
The starters.
Relief pitchers, you got. Let's go with just starters. Your Mount Rushmore of starters.
Mount Rushmore of starters. That's a great question. Working, I would have to put Walter Johnson on there for sure. Bob Feller.
More one hitters than anybody. I mean,
yeah.
Bob Feller. People don't realize how good Bob Feller was.
Right, and he gave a lot of his career to the war,
and a lot of 1 and 2 hitters even still.
Yeah, I mean, strikeout record, pitching at 18 years old. Bob Feller was a legend. You talk about. I don't think, in some ways, maybe the Yankee years were good but not great. He was older than Randy Johnson in his prime was unreal. Randy Johnson in 2001 struck out 419 batters if you include the postseason, which, as we know, the Yankees, he ended it by winning 3 times in the World Series, once in relief.
We know.
So Randy Johnson, I mean, if I think of the 4 pitchers of this recent era who just dominated in a real hitters era, which were Pedro, Maddox, Clemens, and Randy. I got to put one of them on a Mount Rushmore. I'll pick Randy. There was no pitcher ever like Randy. 6'10", strikeouts, most strikeouts ever by a lefty. He beat my favorite lefty for strikeouts.
I'd probably go on Pedro, but
Pedro,
just because he's just 7 innings of don't even bother.
Right.
Hopefully, you can get to the 8th, and he's starting off pitches where he's got to come out.
Yeah.
There's just no hitting him. And I saw him up close and personal.
He hit plenty of times.
So many times where there was just a bunch of years where he was just unhittable.
Yeah.
And you're just like, he was going to get you. He knew exactly what to do, and he did it.
Yeah.
But I like Randy. I mean, Randy Johnson was amazing too in his day, and obviously we saw the pinnacle, in that World Series. But Pedro just did it year in and year out.
No, Pedro at his peak was really, really special. And you know what, the 4th guy, since it's my book, I'll go Steve Carlton. First guy to win 4 Cy Youngs, last guy to pitch 300 innings.
Got to get a lefty in there.
We got Carlton and Randy. And we'll do Walter Johnson and Satchel Paige though. God, how can I leave Satchel Paige?
Cy Young. How about
right?
Whitey Ford too?
Christy
Whitey
Matheson.
Ford. Whitey.
Bob Gibson. Yeah, Whitey was.
How about Bob Gibson?
I know.
I mean, in a big game, and you have one pitcher in Game 7. Who do you pick?
Bob Gibson.
I mean,
even though he lost Game 7 in '68,
yeah.
but I mean, Bob Gibson pitched. I want to say he had 9 starts in the postseason, and he was 7-2, and he pitched 81 innings. I think one game he pitched 10 innings and one game he pitched 8. So it weren't all complete games. But, I mean, hey, even Mariano lost a Game 7 too. You're allowed to lose one Game 7 if you're that
great.
Yes,
you are.
I mean, Mariano, I'd have Gibson. Gibson would probably want to finish that game. But if he didn't, I'd have Mariano there. 2 of the greatest postseason pitchers ever. But, yeah, I mean, God, there's so...
And Whitey, too. Whitey was a great...
Oh, Whitey was fantastic,
a great
amazing that he never pitched a Game 7. But,
great postseason player,
right.
though. Unbelievable.
And there's some good stuff in there about how he, from his biography with Phil Pepe in the '80s, Slick, and he talked all about how he would cut the ball and all of his little methods for.
Do you think
late
all
in
the
his
guys
career,
cut the ball though, in some way or another?
Back then,
even now with the nail and just.
I think a lot, especially back then. I think right now it's be really, really hard to get away with it with all the cameras and all the. The technology that can analyze every kind of spin and all that. I think now it's much more like, just getting a grip. The Michael Pineda thing a few years ago. He was just too overt about it, doing that. But as long as you're subtle about getting a grip,
if you got the fingernail down, you could go scuff that ball.
Maybe,
a little bit.
Naturally with a fingernail. Maybe I don't think anyone's doing Don Sutton and bringing up sandpaper on the mound anymore.
No, not at all. In closing, this book, give me 2 stories that would be shocked, from 2 pitchers you spoke to that really had a much different perspective than you ever thought.
Well, one guy was Carl Erskine, the great Brooklyn Dodger. and I never expected to be connected.
Nice guy.
Wonderful.
Sweetheart.
Wonderful man. Yes. And so I'm talking to him about throwing curveball. He threw great curveballs. And he talked about how the index finger, often comes off the pitch. I mean, you'll see guys if the index finger's up or it's just touching the ball. And he said, it's almost like you don't even need your index finger, which reminds me of Three Finger Brown. I met Three Finger Brown when I was a rookie, or when I was coming up through the minor leagues and in the 3I League, Indiana, Iowa, and Illinois. And he lived in the Terre Haute house in Terre Haute, Indiana. And he'd come down in the lobby, always a well-dressed gentleman, and he would tell all of us young pitchers about how he mangled his hand in a farming accident as a kid, and he'd show us his mangled hand, and it gave him the perfect curveball grip to put in that little chicken claw of a hand, and it was just, wow, I'm talking to someone who knew Three Finger Brown, who's just like a ghost from the past, the 1908 Cubs, and there's Three Finger Brown. So another story, there's 300 pages of them in there. But
by the way, we left Sandy Koufax out of the conversation.
Well, Sandy was amazing, obviously, but it was,
if you had one
it was
pitcher
5-6
to pitch.
years. Yeah, it was only
if
5-6 years.
you had one game to pitch, maybe
in his prime, it's tough to go against him because he won Game 7 on 2 days rest in Minnesota. He, 2 great games against the Yankees in '63, and then the tough luck loss in '66, and I mean he lost a 1-0 game even before he was great in the '59 World Series. So yeah, Sandy deserves a mention for sure. But another story. I mean, they're all in there. But we mentioned earlier Jim Abbott, and this is a real human story you can relate to. Like Jim Abbott, he grows up in Michigan and he likes the Detroit Tigers, right? So he gets drafted by the Angels. No time at all in the minors because he had been a star at University of Michigan,
USA.
Olympic team, right. So he's coming through spring training and he's in big league spring training and he's throwing to Detroit Tigers former catcher Lance Parrish, big superstar of the Tigers, and now he's an older guy with the Angels, and he's catching him. And Abbott's pitch is moving, it's just that crazy kind of late life, that cutter, which he didn't even know he was throwing a cutter, but that's what it was. And Lance Parrish at one point gets up and it just bears in on his glove, and he throws down his glove and he's like, ah! And Jim Abbott on the mound is like, oh my God, I just hurt Lance. It's like one of his childhood heroes, and he's injuring his thumb because his pitch is so good. So that's just one of those things that it's, even if you don't know baseball or don't know who Jim Abbott or Lance Parrish are, you can relate to like what it's like to root for someone when you're a little boy, and 10 years later you're throwing to him, and oh my God, I injured him because I'm just too good, right?
But Jim Abbott's just, his story is
just one of the greatest people ever.
But
that was, that was what, like, he has a wonderful human story that Tim Brown told in their book together. And certainly I mentioned it, but I wanted to talk him about his pitching, how you do what you do. I talked to, baseball is a great unifier. I mean, to talk to people without any other agenda, just about their pitches and their careers. And that's why, I was able to get access to just about anybody I wanted because everybody loves talking baseball.
And they love talking pitching. Did you find a lot of these pitchers had a lot of, they felt the catcher was really important?
Yeah. I mean, Steve Carlton, Tim McCarver, right? They want to be buried 60 feet 6 inches apart. The old saying goes. He had that connection with Lefty and also with Bob Gibson. I mean, that's why McCarver. For one of the many reasons, he's such a treasure and was so great. He does some Cardinal games, still so great on broadcasting because he could tell stories, but also he was the pitcher whisperer for 2 of the all-time greats. I mean, even more recently, he just retired, but A.J. Ellis, who really brought out the best in Clayton Kershaw at the start of Kershaw's career. I talked with A.J. quite a bit just about pitchers and about Clayton and just about the art of catching.
Everything you've seen and the evolution of the pitcher, really, which that could be the name of the book.
Yeah, pretty much.
Who do you think out there now is going to be that next guy that that just we're going to be happy maybe we had an opportunity to see pitch?
Well,
who really rocks you out there?
There's several of them, but one guy I think of is Max Scherzer because, and I'll tell you a little story.
Can you believe Detroit just let him leave?
What's that?
How did Detroit trade him?
I know. Well, they offered him $144 million, and he turned it down, and he bet on himself, and he was right. But so Max Scherzer, I was the MC of the New York Writers Dinner in 2 years, in 13 and 14.
That's every year where they give out the awards.
Give out the Cy Youngs, the MVPs, all that stuff. And one of the things the MC can do is beyond just running the show is I got to pick where people sit on the dais. And so I said, well, who's going to sit next to me? The first year was R.A. Dickey because I knew him. But the second year I said, I want Kershaw to sit next to me. And then I want Koufax to sit next to Kershaw. And then I want Scherzer on the other side because I felt like the 2 Cy Young winners would appreciate being able to flank the great Sandy Koufax at our dinner. And Koufax, by the way, asked to come, paid his way, didn't ask for any favors. He just wanted to be there for Kershaw, which was cool. But the point is that I would look over and I would see Scherzer periodically just talking to Koufax and then getting out his phone and writing out little notes so he could remember just what Sandy Koufax was telling him. He was giving him tips on the curveball. He was asking Sandy for pitching advice, and Sandy was more than happy to give it to Max Scherzer. So Scherzer has that. He's got nasty stuff. We all know that, but he also is a real thinking man's pitcher. He's always trying to learn more. Right after he gets the contract, he goes out and develops a cutter. Like he's always trying to he's like a power Messina, with all these different weapons. He has them, but at an A+ power level.
If Messina plays on a better team, even though he caught the Yankees in a few years of flux, and then obviously the Orioles and that wobbliness, would he be getting more props? Even though he is getting the Hall of Fame, is he an underrated pitcher?
I think so. I mean, he's in the Hall of Fame. It took him a few years, but I mean, eventually he's in, and all the plaques look the same. I think for Mike, I did an interview with, I did a big story on him once when he was playing, and his bullpen catcher, Mike Borzello, he called him his buddy. Really, he called him Mr. Almost, because he almost won a Cy Young, almost won a World Championship, almost pitched a perfect game, almost did all these things. On the final day of his career, he wins his 20th game for the very first time. So we erased that one almost. And I think that's just what it was for him. He had a lot of, it is really hard to pitch better than he did in the 1997 postseason for Baltimore. He beat Randy Johnson twice in the first round. He pitched 2 extraordinary games for the Orioles, but Armando Benitez blew one. And another one, I think they lost the game on a pass ball or something. So sometimes it just doesn't break your way. I think 97 was the Orioles' year. They were the best team in the league. Cleveland bounced them in the playoffs. It happens sometimes. But if he had won a championship that year, won a World Series MVP, how about this? If Josh Beckett doesn't win Game 6 at short rest at Yankee Stadium, Game 7 is Mike Messina against Carl Pavano on the Marlins. And I would have loved to see that matchup. Mike Messina could have won Game 7 of the World Series for the Yankees.
But that's a big if, by the way.
It's a big if.
They were swirling.
And the Marlins were really good that year too. They were young and they were energetic.
They were really good
and
in
stuff.
the pitching. When you look at their team, I don't know. I mean, they had some players there, but we should have won that series. If David Wells shows up for that game
for Game 5,
Game 5, then it kind of messed up their rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know.
Andy pitched a great game in Game 6 too. Andy pitched a great game in Game 2. I mean that series was kind of a toss-up. They weren't really ready for Game 1. They lost.
That's the problem. The Thursday night and Saturday
and
winning.
Right.
And then I think it cost them. The rotation was all out of whack.
Yeah.
And they were all out partying, all out before
I thought they win Game 2, and then they go to Miami, and Messina beats Beckett in Game 3. And I'm thinking, well, this series might not even go back home. You got Clemens in Game 4. It was supposedly the last game of his career. Pitched pretty well. Figured, Roger will win Game 4, all the emotion, and then Wells will wrap it up. But I'm just saying, imagine if there was a Game 7 with Messina versus Pavano at the stadium, the Yankees having just won Game 6 after what Messina did in Game 7 of the Boston series. Right.
That would have been funny. But beating Beckett in 6 was not going to be easy. And I think the Game 5 was a setback for them. I think they lost their mojo. Mm-hmm. They shot their load on that game. I think they were just way too excited about beating the Red Sox. Mm-hmm. And that was a prize, but that wasn't the ultimate prize.
Yeah, but then they get up 2-1 in the series, and then Jeff Weaver gives the home run, and Torrey never uses Rivera in Game 4 in a tie game on the road, and that was a interesting but ultimately weird series for the Yankees because I tell you, I've said this before. I was at the second World Series game I ever went to, Game 5 in '83 at the Vet. Scott McGregor pitched a shutout to win the World Series, and they're 65.
Who's that? Game 3. The Phillies were playing
Baltimore, '83.
I was that. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Game 3 was on Friday night. Carlton and Palmer, the last game for both, last World Series game for both. Game 4 was my first game in the afternoon, and then Game 5, and it was so quiet at this giant stadium with 67,000 people. It was so quiet because the Phillies could not get anything going. It was just like that same feeling 20 years later at Yankee Stadium. Beckett pitched that shutout. Yankee Stadium should be rocking, and Beckett just unplugged it. It was a weird feeling. It was almost like it was a 2-run game, but it felt like a 10-run game.
It did feel like a 10-run game. You're right.
Those 96-mile-an-hour fastballs and that hook, and they just couldn't do it. Couldn't do much with it.
A lot of players talk about Game 5 of that when that series got lost with Wells.
Yeah, Wells walking
last minute.
And they had sent Andy back for, they had him fly back a couple days early, so they had to try to piece it together. Contreras and Hammond and all those guys.
Hopefully look for your comments, your Mount Rushmore pitchers. Not Mount Everest, Mount Rushmore. Anyway, Dave, thanks for having us. Thanks for coming on board. Thanks for bringing a book. We'll give away a couple balls. Look to see where you're from, favorite team. Love your comments. Love this book. How great is this baseball season going to be?
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's
There's
also a crazy
lot-
start. A lot
there's
of supposedly bad teams are doing great, and the good teams aren't. So
I think there'll be some surprises this year. Although the good teams are going to always be good, but it'd be nice to see the Mets do well. It'd be nice to get baseball back in New York on both sides.
on both sides, it'd be fantastic.
That'd be cool. Be nice to see the Phillies back into it. That's why you're all hyped up, probably.
Well, I mean,
But it's good.
the Phillies Mets, on those rare years when they're both good at the same time, it's pretty exciting, the proximity.
That's good. That's good stuff. All right, everybody. We'll be back in the next couple of days with a couple more. Love this book. Pick it up on Amazon.com, and hopefully your comments, you'll win a copy of this book. Have a great day, everyone.